How's your retirement plan coming along? Well, today we'll make it a heck of a lot better with Morningstar's Director of Personal Finance and Retirement Planning, Christine Benz.
I'm so happy she's back here with us. Christine Benz, how are you?
I'm so good, Joe. Thank you so much for having me on.
You know, there's a question that ever since I first met you that I've wondered about, and we'll get to your current project, and I think it actually kind of ties into your current project, but a lot of our stackers are interested in maybe becoming financial planners. I think we get 5 or 6 emails a month. I'm thinking about changing my career. How did you first get interested in financial planning?
Well, I would say it probably happened while I was working as an analyst at Morningstar, and I was covering mutual funds, researching mutual funds, and then I eventually headed up our U.S. fund analyst team. But while I was doing that, I was like, gosh, there are a lot of things that seem to be important here in terms of people's financial wellness / wherewithal that we're not addressing. And so I was like, what are all those other things that kind of make or break someone's financial success? So things like asset allocation and tax planning and portfolio construction and all of the dimensions of retirement planning that I've gotten so focused on. So that was kind of a pivot for me. And, Jonathan Clements has been in the headlines as he's announced his recent cancer diagnosis. But I've had the opportunity to tell him and to just tell everyone about how important reading his column was for me in terms of making that pivot.
And for people that don't know who he is the former personal finance contributor to the Wall Street Journal and author of The Humble Dollar. And he's been, of course, on the show. But yeah, just a wonderful human being.
He is a wonderful human being, a fabulous writer, a fabulous thinker, and someone who I've gotten to know personally a bit through our mutual association with the Bogleheads community. And reading Jonathan's column every week in the journal was just such a pivotal thing for me because I at the time, I laugh about it, but I thought I needed to read like the whole Wall Street Journal every day. So I would, read all this stuff about corporate actions and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, but this guy, he seems to be telling people what they really need to know and what they can safely ignore. And so reading Jonathan was just really pivotal in terms of informing my own career direction, wanting to focus more on financial planning, get away from the investment selection. Not that I don't think it's important, I do, but it really opened my eyes to the world of financial planning. So I went through the CFP program, took all the coursework. And at the time, which was sort of in the early 2000s, I want to say, the CFP had this work requirement that would not allow my Morningstar work, even though I think you could argue it was very much related.
I would think so.
Yeah, it didn't qualify. So I was like, well, I don't want to leave here to go do the hands-on practitioner stuff I would need to do to earn the designation. So never earned my CFP, but nonetheless found it to be a super worthwhile download of information. So I always say for people who are kind of contemplating that career pivot, think about going through CFP, at least take the first course, see what you think, and then go from there. Because whenever I look at a planner, I always take their measure by seeing, well, what are their designations? And if someone is purporting to be a planner, I really like to see those CFP credentials, which I do not have.
Well, what's funny about that, though, is that it truly, to your point, doesn't mean that somebody is phenomenal, but it certainly is a rigorous curriculum that just to get through it, I think a lot of people that don't take the coursework. I like that as a first measure, like a first checkbox. Are you CFP? Certainly not the last one, but a great first one. But just personally. So do you like it better than being an analyst? Do you like dealing with the whole well-rounded thing versus diving into the Janus fund or whatever?
Right. Well, truly, I was we joked because Janus was so hot in the kind of the late 90s, early 2000s. I was our Janus analyst.
How about that?
Yeah. So I do enjoy what I work on just because it's so broad. It's like this deep blue ocean of different topics. There are so many different tentacles of financial planning. And to me, it intersects a little bit more directly with the human aspect of all of this, which I've gotten more interested in, that we are all human beings making financial decisions, and financial planning is squarely aligned with the human side of finances.
Well, and you even say in this work that more than 50% of a good retirement plan is not about the money. It's about other things. And it's wild to see just the job of CFPs, speaking of CFPs, change over the years. Like when I was a financial planner in the 90s, it was nothing like, I mean, so behavioral now, Christine. Like what's that other 50% besides the money that you're talking about in your book?
Yeah, I've gotten an appreciation for all of those other things, and an appreciation for retirement planning is not a math problem. I think Michael Finke said something like that in the book. And I've just come to realize the importance of purpose later in life as we step away from work. What are we doing to replace the thing that got us up in the morning? What are we doing to replace those relationships that we had at work? And for some people, this might be really seamless. Maybe they have a great network of friends besides their work friends. But for men, especially, the data suggests that men sometimes struggle with that they don't have those connections besides their partners, their spouses. So purpose, relationships, physical activity, keeping yourself healthy later in life, making smart housing choices. And of course, that's intertwined with the financial piece. But just all of the other dimensions of your life are a component of retirement planning. And I think when you bring them in and when you marry them to the financial, the whole thing just comes to life, and it becomes more fun when you think about, well, here's my vision for what I want my later years to be like. And also, to have sober thoughts about how you think your life will evolve, because unfortunately, I think it's the human condition that we kind of think of ourselves today as how it will ever be thus, that we think will always be, healthy.
I'm not going to change. You're going to change. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So looking forward and thinking about how retirement may actually be kind of a series of phases, and making sure that you're kind of getting ahead of those phases, so that if there are decisions that you need to make down the line, that you've been thoughtful about them and you've communicated them to your loved ones.
It's so much more comfortable. As I was reading through these 20 lessons, and we'll get to just a couple of them here in a moment, but I was reading through them. I think it's very comforting. It's like the pilot coming on and telling us that there's going to be turbulence ahead. I'm generally a nervous flyer if they don't tell me, like, I imagine, I don't know about you, Christine, but whenever the plane hits turbulence and the pilot hasn't said anything, I'm imagining these two people in the cockpit just screaming and the plane's going down and there's warning lights all over the place. But if they tell me, hey, buckle your seatbelt, it's going to get bumpy, and this is kind of what to expect, it makes it easier. I feel like this roadmap you're trying to set out with these people is very much the same.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was the goal, that to help people look forward beyond where they are just as they embark on retirement, to think of retirement as a series of phases, I do think is a great way to address it, and just to put yourself in the driver's seat or in the pilot cockpit, however you want to put it, but to make sure that if you are changing, if you need to make changes to your lifestyle, that you're driving those changes, not your kids necessarily.
You structure this project as 20 discussions with very smart people in the space. You begin with a gentleman, Michael Finke, who is a great thinker. I expect that Michael's going to be talking about charts and graphs and numbers. And you don't go there. Like, it's the very first interview you do, Christine. Did it surprise you that when you're talking to him, that you're not going to talk numbers? He decides to lead off this book with feelings.
Well, exactly. And that's why I wanted to lead off the book in that way. Michael is one of my favorite retirement researchers and has done some great work on topics like annuities and safe withdrawal rates and all the other stuff that retirement research geeks work on. But Michael also has this deep well of knowledge about what contributes to happiness and satisfaction later in life. So we discuss the role of healthy habits, thinking about how you will maintain your health, how you will maintain relationships later in life. And he also has this important point about the fact that even when you're retired, you need to be relaxing from something, that this contrast of like doing something that involves some work, some engagement makes that relaxation all the more enjoyable. And we all know this, from our working lives, that vacations are especially sweet when we've just come through a really difficult, challenging work period. And I think the same is true in retirement. You still want to set up that contrast where you're getting stuff done, and then you can sit back and enjoy, time on the beach or golf course or whatever it is that is your sort of dream retirement vision.
Well, can we pause on that for a second? Because I want to make sure our stackers hear very clearly what you're saying here. Most people, I think I'm good saying most, I haven't done the research, but I would guess that it's most, just, my little 16 years meeting with individuals. Almost everybody who came into my office thought that retirement equaled relaxation. Like retirement was, I get to do whatever the heck I want to do. And it's going to be these relaxing activities. And the two of you have this discussion, and I know you just said this, but it's no. Because of that, can you talk a little bit about, because I think this is a really important point, relaxing from something. What does that mean? And how does this change? If retirement does not equal relaxation, what would be a better descriptor for, quote, retirement than relaxation?
Well, I think an important component of this is making sure that you have a purpose. So it doesn't have to be paid work. If you're stepping out of the workforce, that's totally fine. But the point is to have some sort of purpose that is motivating you, animating you, giving you a sense of, I'm still contributing here. And I think that is just a huge part of human satisfaction. It doesn't go away when we retire. And maybe it's having more time to babysit your grandkids or whatever. It doesn't have to be this thing that Jordan Grummett talks about it in the book. It doesn't have to be what he calls big P purpose, like you're starting a foundation or you're climbing Machu Picchu or something like that. But you do that stuff, but it can be what he calls smaller P purpose things. Like you might say, I've worked really hard, but I haven't been as great a partner to my spouse as I would have hoped. Or I haven't had as much time with my friends as I would hope to have. Or there was this hobby that I let go 20 years ago that I want to re-engage with. And so those are what Jordan calls small P purpose. And the point is to come into retirement with a sense of what those things are for you. And then, when you've got those purposes lined up, and you might do a little bit of experimentation around them, but when you've got those things lined up that you want to focus on, then you can also have, I think, your leisure basket, the things that really aren't necessarily purpose at all, but are just like, I have not had time to sit on my back deck as much as I'd want, or, there's this and this Netflix show that I've wanted to see, and I only have, the bandwidth to watch a half hour of TV a night or whatever it is. You have both things and they work together. And I think the true leisure activities, you enjoy that much more when you have the purposes lined up.
When it's coming from, again, back to from purpose. And that brings up another thing that surprised me about not just your discussion with Michael, but it also kind of resonates throughout the book. This idea, we also think about retirement as non-structured, but really, Christine, I would say, even though you don't say this really out loud, you don't make this as a big point. Structure is a big part of a successful retirement, I think.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. Jamie Hopkins makes the point, and I'm not sure this is his original idea, but the idea is try this calendar exercise. Look at your calendar for, say, your first month in retirement, or look at a week in retirement and kind of plot out what you'll do with your time, because it's super important to set up structure that gets back to healthy habits, where if you have things you'd like to achieve, you really do need to put them on a schedule, just as you did while you were working. At the same time, I would say it's also super valuable to do leave time for unstructured time, because frankly, as a working person, that is one of the things that I miss. And I have periodically taken these sabbaticals from work. I just had one this summer, and that was one thing I really enjoyed about the time away. Was there was one day I was out for a walk to my local antiques mall, and I looked out the window and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's raining buckets out there. I don't have an umbrella. And so I just was like, oh, well, I love this place anyway. I think I spent 3 hours in this antique mall going through old records, looking at vintage jewelry and housewares. And it was just so wonderful to not have this sense of being on the clock. So I think, as a retired person, you do have to relish being unstructured sometimes. Another thing that I really enjoyed during the sabbatical was like being the person who, if you tie with someone at the stop sign, being the person who could be like, yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not in a hurry.
Right, exactly. And there is something that's really lovely about that. Even while you might schedule your important activities, do savor that unscheduled time.
It is funny, I feel like with all of our devices around us, and, you mentioned Netflix earlier, and all the things that can entertain us all the time, like the power of boredom and being stuck a little bit is really can be a cool thing for you. I was very surprised when you and Michael talked about social interactions, and you brought this up already, men and loneliness as they get older, big thing. But making sure that you socialize and you remain a part of your community, maybe even expand how much you're in the community now that you have time to work in the community versus whatever you were doing before. I was surprised. Michael really brought up most experts that come on the show talk about how bad your devices are and how social media, Christine's just killing us. But he was pretty positive. He was like, if you do this right in retirement, your devices can really help you expand that social network.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting point too, Joe. And I think Michael's point is that it is an addition to the social networks, that it shouldn't replace your in-person interactions with people, but he frequents these online communities of older adults, of people who are sharing experiences, sharing ideas about how to proceed down the road of retirement. And he feels like there is a lot of very positive engagement that goes on. I had a discussion in the book with Laura Karstensen, who's the retirement longevity researcher at Stanford, and she talked about devices as well. And she noted that indeed the online interactions, or even just the text group texts that you might have with your friends group, her viewpoint is that those are great, but that they need to be in addition to the face-to-face interactions. One can't replace the other.
Almost like tying you together between the times that you get to be in the room together, I would think.
Exactly. And I shared with Laura that my two best friends are both in California, but we do make a point of getting together at least once or twice a year, even as we're texting almost every day, or truly every day.
Your second discussion is with Fritz Gilbert. We've had Fritz on the show before, retirement manifesto blogger, and a guy who not only writes about successful retirement, truly has had a successful retirement of his own. And talk about community, by the way, he and his wife's mission that he talks about. Tell us a little more about Fritz, and why did you want to include him in this project?
Yeah, I've loved meeting Fritz. We've had him on our Morningstar podcast a couple of times. And for one thing, I wanted him to talk about the nitty gritty steps to take as retirement approaches. So, kind of set the clock and get yourself maybe 5 years ahead. What are the steps that I need to take as I inch toward retirement? And Fritz is always just so incredibly specific about things and kind of methodical in a way that I appreciate. But I did want Fritz to be part of the project because, as you said, Joe, I think he so beautifully illustrates how to do retirement well, in that he and his wife have this charity project called Fences for Fido, where they're building these fences for dogs that would otherwise be on chains. So the dogs are able to be freed from their chains, have a little bit more space to roam around. Is probably good for the families to see their dogs have a little bit more freedom. And so this is something that Fritz and his wife are passionate about, but it has brought this social network to them. They moved to a new community in retirement, and this group of people who work on this shares their values in terms of this charity project, but it's also just turned into a great social network where I think they meet up for beers at a microbrewery, and it's also physically engaging, this work that they do, which to me seems like it ticks a lot of boxes. You've got the friends network, you've got some outdoor physical activity, and you've got something that's bringing you purpose in the sense that you're doing some good in the world. So I did want Fritz to talk about that project because I personally find it so inspiring.
You start off your discussion with Fritz with the big question. And it actually is funny. I'll get to the question in a second, but I think about people. I thought about this as I was reading through your discussion with Michael as well, which was, we think about retirement, and in a lot of ways, the way we have it now, it is so much a social construct, which, Christine, we'll see somebody who's 40 and they'll tell us they're retired, and we'll say, what? Why? And why are you wasting your time? But then what's funny is we'll see somebody who's 75 and they're still working, and we'll say the exact same question, but kind of the stank is elsewhere. It's what? Why? Why are you wasting your time? Like, we have these set ages that we associate retirement with, which I think we need to get rid of those. But with Fritz, you asked the question, your very first question is, what's the right retirement date? How did he answer that?
He said that everyone had told him he would just know, but he used his own experience. He said he just, I think, was really starting to think about the next chapter, and he said he actually did kind of know. He and I did discuss this idea of kind of phased retirement, which frankly I find really appealing. Probably just kind of thinking about my own personal situation, that I probably don't want retirement to be a hard stop. But I think the broader point is that it's very individual specific. I get a little nervous when I hear people think that retirement necessarily has to be at 65 or when their Social Security benefits kick in or whatever. It's very individual specific. I also am a little dismayed when I hear people think that simply because they have the assets to retire, they should retire. And I'm not at all convinced that's the right answer in every situation. There are many, many situations, I think, where people should continue to pursue some type of work, maybe paid, maybe unpaid.
I've seen that. Well, this goes, Christine, right to purpose. I've seen this in my life, being around a lot of creators and business owners. I can think right offhand of 3 business owners that I know that sold their business at a youngish age because they were getting a big check. And it is clear, even to them, a couple of them say it out loud, they're lost. Like, they're struggling to find their identity again because of your point that, hey, just because I can and I have the asset that I could sell, that might have been a better idea not to.
Yeah, I think Michael Finke says in the book, it's not a math problem, people, this idea about, or this decision about whether and when to retire. There's so much more that you need to weave into it. So the finances are one piece. If you feel financially set, great. But there are a lot of other things that you need to think through before embarking on retirement.
But you and Fritz, a couple money nerds sitting around talking about what to do 5 years out. What do we do 5 years out?
I'm trying to think. I think on his list was to start exploring long-term care. I would argue you should probably start in kind of your mid-50s to be thinking about that decision.
And you're talking about the issue, not the insurance, right?
Well, maybe both, but making sure that you have a plan for long-term care is crucial. And for some people, perhaps some sort of an insurance product might be a fit. But for others, especially those with substantial assets, thinking about, well, how much do I need to set aside for long-term care? Where am I putting those funds? How am I investing the money? All of those sorts of considerations. I'm trying to think. Social Security claiming decisions, I think, was probably sort of toward the front end of the thought process for Fritz on the kind of calendar countdown to retirement. He's actually a big believer in physically putting a countdown calendar on, or a countdown clock on your phone, just to give you a sense of, okay, this thing is approaching. I need to lay the groundwork.
It's real.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe that he and I also talked about making some changes to your portfolio in that period, in, say, the 5 years before retirement, because one thing I see a lot is that many older adults do have very equity heavy portfolios today. And this is an outgrowth of the fact that we've had a really great stock market. They have not de-risked. Bonds have not been great. They haven't been a compelling alternative, but yields have come up a lot. And I do think that de-risking is a really great idea for people at that life stage. Don't wait until you're like a year before retirement to say, oh, holy cow, I'm 95% stocks in my retirement portfolio. You need to get ahead of that and start building out that bulwark of safer assets.
I totally would agree that it's return chasing. It's been forever, and it will be 50 years from now. It's going to be people chasing what was hot yesterday. That's always going to happen. But do you also think it has something to do with longevity? Like we stay in equities longer because we know that we may live longer?
Well, potentially so. And I do think no matter who you are, if you have some sort of an investment portfolio and you need it to grow, you do need the growth that stocks can provide. So I would argue that most retirees probably should have a minimum of 50% of their portfolios in stocks, probably more. And that is because, when we look at the various asset classes with the best long run opportunity to outrun inflation by a decent margin, stocks are it. Fixed income assets and certainly cash are not it on an inflation adjusted basis. You might modestly outperform the inflation rate, but probably not by a lot. So you're not going to get any growth there.
You have such interesting conversations with 20 brilliant and compelling people like friends of the show, Gene Chatzky, Ramit Sethi, Cameron Huddleston, our collaborating partner. Of course, you mentioned him earlier, Jordan Grummett, aka Doc G. Where did you find most of these people overlap? Was there a theme that you maybe, Christine, did not expect as you're doing these interviews?
One theme, and I referenced it earlier, is the idea of phasing into retirement. Several of the experts discussed the value of that, about being thoughtful about that, potentially seeing if you can kind of have a mental ledger as retirement draws close, where you're thinking about your work and you're creating that stop doing list, like the things that you do not enjoy. Okay, let's put them to one side and say, whatever we do later in life, it will not involve these tasks. But then take stock of your really happy days at work. If you've had a great day and you kind of walk out of work thinking like, yeah, that was a really good day, take stock of your activities. Are there some of those things that you can carry forward later in life? And again, it doesn't have to be by continuing to work, but if you're pursuing volunteer activities, for example, making sure that they entail some of those sort of kindred activities to what you were doing while you were working. So that was one thing. Numerous people also talked about the virtue of really trying to be thoughtful about enlarging your non-portfolio income sources. So people approach this in different ways, but the name of the game is to try to get those to be as large as you possibly can coming into retirement or in the early years of retirement. So that's looking at maximizing Social Security. And I talked to Mary Beth Franklin about making sure you get your fair share of Social Security. Numerous people discuss the role of annuities. Some hate them, some actually like them. So that was an interesting debate. People have differing views about annuities.
And that's such a shock, Christine, such a shock.
Very controversial area. I mean, one of the issues is that I think the term annuity is so broad and encompassing that it's almost not helpful because you have so many different product types bundled under that one umbrella. So it's not surprising that there's some disagreement there, but I would argue that retirees shouldn't reflexively rule them out, especially if they are, I think a key idea would be if you're coming into retirement, you've got your basic expenses that you're going to have to pay for. See if you can't get those non-portfolio income sources to align with those fixed outlays. I think that's a terrific strategy when thinking about in retirement budgeting.
To your point, people that really needed annuities back when I was a financial advisor, and it wasn't as often as I see them out there and being missold, misappropriated, or people that needed permanent life insurance for their specific strategy, which again, another niche group of people, because of this broad stroke stuff. To your point, Christine, these broad brushes people have, it was so difficult to get the few people that needed these things to actually accept them. They're like, oh, I heard it's bad.
Right.
It was so frustrating. All right. That's the overlap. Let's talk about the other side. As you're doing these interviews, any wild outliers where you're like, wow, so-and-so said this thing, and that was way different than I thought, or way different than what anybody else was saying?
I would say I love Ramit, but his thoughts on kind of spending, not that it's an outlier, but I think it's an eye-opening discussion about...
Are you saying that Ramit Sethi said something spicy? Is that what you're about to say?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't do that at all.
He's one of my favorites. But we talked about retirement spending and just making sure that the expenditures that you're making are in line with what you truly value rather than just sort of mimicking what everyone in your world is doing. I feel like that's a thought-provoking chapter. I love that message for younger people, but I also think it resonates for people getting close to retirement where maybe, you see your friends all doing certain things and really just step back and take the measure of whether that is the right activity or outlay for you. So I found Ramit's a discussion of how to do that, how to be thoughtful about that, to be super refreshing as I do find most of his work.
The book is How to Retire, 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement. It is definitely, as I mentioned, a great way to see the turbulence that might be coming and also to appreciate some of the fun things retirement can be if you just do a little bit of planning. You've seen these statistics, Christine. People will plan more for their next family vacation than they do for their retirement years, which is crazy. But the book's out.
It is available through all the major channels, and I'm very proud of it. I think everyone will find something new in it. And just, I love the cast of characters that we assembled to be part of the book. I'm very thrilled to be associated with each of these people.
Well, thank you for mentoring our stackers on retirement today. I super appreciate you and this work.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's been a pleasure.